On Monday, June 10th, the Karen Reed trial continued with day 22 of testimony and still in the prosecution's case in chief. It was a day of fireworks in the courtroom, and in my opinion, the worst day yet for the prosecution, to the extent that I don't know if they can recover beyond this point. It started with a motion hearing with the prosecution trying to keep out a handful of expert witnesses being offered by the defense. Then the jury saw the remainder of the testimony by Sergeant Yuri Bukhenik from the Massachusetts State Police. After that, the prosecution called Officer Nicholas Barros. I don't know why they did, since his testimony really only helped the defense, but they did. And finally, the prosecution called the defense's chief boogeyman, the man we've all been waiting to hear from, Trooper Michael Proctor, the lead investigator in this case. All told, this is probably the most disastrous day for the prosecution yet. And personally, I walked away with some serious questions, not just about how rotten Trooper Proctor as an individual is, but also how deep this rot goes through the Massachusetts State Police, the Canton PD, and even the DA's office as well. What became clear to me by the end of the day was the serious repercussions that this trial can have on the community at large, particularly if it causes them to lose faith and trust in the judicial system as a whole. And that is absolutely a possibility based on what came out on day 22 of this trial. Let's get into it. So before we get into the testimony of the day, let's talk a little bit about the motion hearing that happened first thing in the morning. The motion was brought by the prosecution, who wanted the judge to prevent a handful of defense experts from testifying in the defense case in chief. Basically, the crux of their argument was that they said that the prosecution produced these experts too late, and that this was basically gamesmanship on the part of the defense. The defense, on the other hand, said that most of these experts were people that they learned about as a result of the federal grand jury hearing. And so basically what they mean by this is that they didn't know about the existence of these people until after these deadlines, and so therefore they should still be able to bring them in. So from what it sounds like, if the witnesses are ultimately allowed to testify in this trial, we'll be hearing from those same experts that reportedly testified in that grand jury hearing. Now, one thing about this hearing on the morning of day 22 that raised an eyebrow for me personally was something that Judge Cannone did when defense attorney David Yannetti was arguing the defense's position. As he started to really open up his argument, the judge basically cut him off at the knees, preventing him from making what seemed like half of his argument. Her reasoning was that this was not in front of the jury for them to decide, it was up for her to decide, so she didn't want to hear hyperbole from the defense. She seemed very impatient overall with the whole hearing, and even mentioned at one point that she had just told the jury that they'd be able to go into deliberations by the end of June. And she indicated that this seemed to now be putting that into question. However, regardless of how impatient Judge Cannone was feeling and how much the jury was being forced to wait while the parties hash out these particular issues, the defense, in my opinion, should still be able to put on their case to get their arguments on the record. And the way in which she cut off Yannetti, preventing him from making a big portion of his argument, felt like she was interfering with the defense's rights here. At the end of the day, I will say that the defense was able to secure the ability to do voir dire of their purported experts. So it looks like, at least to this point so far, they've gotten what they wanted. And ultimately, if the experts are allowed to testify, and allowed to testify as experts as the defense is hoping, then Judge Cannone cutting off Yannetti during this hearing is ultimately a no harm, no foul situation. But if these witnesses are ultimately not allowed to testify, or not to the extent that the defense is hoping, then this issue of Judge Cannone preventing Yannetti from getting his argument on the record could potentially be an issue. So we'll find out in the coming days whether or not these experts will be able to testify, and I suppose we'll go from there. Anyway, then the court moved on to finish the testimony of Trooper Yuri Bukhenik. And on day 22, ultimately two things happened with Trooper Bukhenik. The first is Alan Jackson went over the inverted surveillance footage again.
Because I was inverted.
Bullshit. No, he was, man. It was a really great move. She was inverted.
And in the process, he drew out of Trooper Bukhenik once again that his testimony was that this footage was accurate, super accurate. And every time, Bukhenik would basically say, yeah, it's mirror image, but it's the same thing. It's just like looking into a mirror. And after hammering him a bit with this question about the accuracy of the video, Jackson then introduced a thumb drive showing the same surveillance footage, but doubly inverted. In other words, the way it was supposed to look in the first place. And at first, it looked like a whole new video. Of course, it quickly became clear that it was the same video, but the jury was just seeing it the way it was supposed to look as a whole new experience. And here's the thing, a witness can characterize evidence up and down the way that they want to 7 days a week. But at the end of the day, where the jurors are able to see evidence for themselves, they're going to trust their own eyes above the trust me bro testimony of the witness. This can even be true of expert testimony, where a juror feels like the testimony doesn't pass the smell test, they will treat it accordingly. So it could very well be that the jurors in this case are looking at Trooper Bukhenik with another level of skepticism, having seen the right side up version of the surveillance footage now, if they disagree with the way that he was saying that it was mirror imaged but basically looked the same. But we'll see what the jury thinks at the end of trial perhaps. Anyway, the other thing that came up on Bukhenik's cross-examination was a point about the other Sallyport surveillance footage. Another thing that had come up previously was that there was footage that was almost entirely black, which also showed the Sallyport when Karen Reed's SUV was brought in on January 29th, 2022. Now, most of this footage appeared unintelligible to me, basically. However, Jackson brought in a portion of this footage where you could make out a little bit of the outlines of the vehicles in the Sallyport. And when Jackson did that, he also directed Trooper Bukhenik's attention to the timestamps on that video. And similar to the other Sallyport footage, what appears is that there is a chunk of this footage that's missing. To be exact, it is around 42 minutes of footage. Bukhenik tried to fight and say that it never existed, but this truly was speculative, given that he's not an IT guy and he's not the person who even pulled this footage. So how could he possibly know that it never existed in the first place? This wrapped up Trooper Bukhenik's testimony. Anyway, the next witness was Officer Nicholas Barros from the Dighton PD. Honestly, as I said in the intro of this video, I don't know why the prosecution even called him in the first place. His testimony was basically exclusively beneficial to the defense. He testified that he was working on January 29th, 2022 for the Dighton PD and that he was called to Karen Reed's parents' house while Trooper Bukhenik and Trooper Proctor came to interview Karen. As a courtesy, the troopers apparently requested permission from Dighton PD to go and interview Karen, and that's why he went with them. Anyway, he testified to seeing a crack in the taillight of Karen's SUV. However, his testimony lined up with that of Carrie Roberts, but was inconsistent with the testimony of the other people who have testified to seeing this taillight at other times. Specifically, here's what he said.
From where you're standing at the point of the garage, was what part of the vehicle was facing you? Was it the front of the vehicle, the back of the vehicle, the side of the vehicle?
I was looking at the left side of the vehicle.
And at some point, did you make any observations of the right rear part of that Lexus SUV?
I did.
And what, if anything, did you observe about that area of the vehicle?
I saw that there was some damage to the right rear taillight. To my best ability and recollection, that tail light was not completely damaged. It was cracked and a piece was missing, but not completely damaged.
And then beyond the tail light area of that vehicle, what, if anything else, did you observe as far as damage to the rear passenger side area?
Like a dent on the rear quarter.
And as far as the dent on the rear quarter of the panel that you saw, was that above the tail light, below the tail light, or something?
It's probably right in conjunction with the taillight in that same area.
Now, at the end of this direct examination, just like what happened with Carrie Roberts, Officer Barros was not cross-examined by the defense. This signaled to the jury, once again, that the defense was saying, we're not only not afraid of this testimony, we actually have zero problem with it whatsoever. And it's not hard to see why. It actually stands at this point in the trial in pretty stark contradiction to the testimony so far about how the state troopers continued to collect 45 pieces of taillight over the weeks that followed. After all, if Karen's SUV only had essentially a small crack in it at this particular time, as Officer Barros testified, those taillight pieces couldn't have all fallen hours before at 34 Fairview Road when she supposedly hit John O'Keefe. And the jury may very well have questions about that inconsistency. Anyway, the final witness of the day was Trooper Michael Proctor. As a reminder, he is the lead investigator on this case. He was responsible for gathering all of the evidence and figuring out what actually happened. Typically, the lead investigator is one of the star witnesses in any trial because they're the one who can typically tie together the prosecution's case into a single narrative so that the jury can understand how all of this happened and how all of these pieces actually fit together. And his testimony, as you can imagine, took up the rest of the day and didn't even finish at the end of day 22. Most of this on day 22 was direct examination, of course. And for the first time ever in this trial, it seems, the prosecution decided to try their hand at getting ahead of bad facts by going through the awful text messages between Trooper Proctor and many other people in his orbit. However, this played out terribly because usually getting ahead of bad facts involves providing additional context or explanation that can help to make this bad information look better, to reframe it in a different light. But even as Trooper Proctor tried to give explanations and context for all of this bad information, it really, really didn't land well for the prosecution at all, in my opinion. But maybe you differ in your opinion, and if so, I want to know in the comments down below, and I want to know why. Of course, after we go through all of this bad information. But before we get into the bad facts, let's first go over the other stuff that Trooper Proctor talked about chronologically. So he said that around 6:48 a.m. on January 29th, 2022, he got a call from Trooper Bukhenik about the case. When he spoke to the firefighter paramedics, he said that Anthony Flamati, who we heard from earlier in this trial, told him that John O'Keefe was found with an injury to his right arm, his eyes, and a cut to his right eye. Flamati also apparently told him that John had a 10% chance of survival at the hospital. Around 10 a.m., Trooper Proctor said that he arrived at Canton PD where he heard from Sergeant Sean Good. Sergeant Good apparently identified Carrie Roberts, Jennifer McCabe, and Karen Reed as the women who were on scene that morning. So Trooper Proctor then interviewed Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, and Brian Albert at the McCabe house. He then went with Trooper Bukhenik to the Good Samaritan Hospital where they saw John O'Keefe's body, observed his injuries, and took his shirt, sweatshirt, shoes, etc. into evidence bags. As for the injuries, he said John's right forearm had abrasions, both of his eyes were swollen and black, his right nostril and left eye both had cuts, and the back of his head had blood, although he couldn't see the laceration that had actually caused the bleeding. Anyway, from there, they went to Dighton to interview Karen at her parents' house. He said he met the Dighton PD officer and the tow truck when they arrived. Then they apparently obtained Karen's phone and SUV and took both to Canton PD. When asked if he and Trooper Bukhenik ever messed with the vehicle, he said, "Sergeant Bukhenik and I never touched any part of that vehicle." Anyway, he then said that on February 1st, 2022, he returned for the processing of the SUV. He said that between January 29th and February 1st, he did not go back to the Sally Port at any point. And while processing, he said that Maureen Hartnett, who we heard from earlier in this trial, removed the taillight housing. Trooper Proctor was then asked to show the actual taillight housing that was taken off of Karen Reed's car. And here's the thing about this move. I already said that I don't understand why Lally called Officer Barros earlier, since he testified that the taillight had damage and it was missing a piece, but that it wasn't totally destroyed. And what Trooper Proctor just showed the jury does not look like the description that Officer Barros gave the jury earlier that morning. And the thing about Officer Barros is that he's not someone who seems to have any connection to any of the parties or any of the other witnesses in this case. So this inconsistency feels very material, especially when it's directly compared to the taillight that Trooper Proctor, who has this huge cloud of suspicion over him during this trial, is holding this taillight piece up for the jury. In my opinion, this is just highlighting this inconsistency and at the same time highlighting the person who is already under suspicion. Anyway, then he said that he went back to 34 Fairview Road on successive dates when he found the black drinking straw, the hat, and the many, many pieces of plastic taillight. He explained that after January 29th, about 2 feet of snow had fallen. And so in the days and weeks that followed, the snow started melting, so more pieces started to appear. He also said that around this time, he went to John's house to document John's vehicle and the garage to show that there was no damage to either one. And so Lally showed Trooper Proctor on the stand the ring surveillance footage from where Karen's car appears to come in contact with John's car around 5 a.m. on January 29th, 2022. Then Lally asked Trooper Proctor whether he found any taillight pieces around John's car. Trooper Proctor said no. Lally then also paused the footage and asked Trooper Proctor about the taillight, and Trooper Proctor said that it showed lighting that indicated that it was broken. Now, the activity log of this ring footage, which we've heard about before, came up again, this time with Trooper Proctor. And he said that there were periods of time that were missing from this ring camera from the morning of January 29th, 2022. And so he said that he wanted to find out the digital footprint to see if anyone had deleted it. However, he said that he couldn't get an activity log from the Ring Corporation, so he wasn't able to verify. He still tried to testify that it was deleted, but this drew a properly sustained objection on the basis of speculation. Anyway, Lally then introduced photos of John's car and the garage doors, showing that neither had any material damage to them. After this, Trooper Proctor was asked to take pieces of taillight and glass from evidence bags to show the jury. Then the prosecution brought up the subject of Trooper Proctor's relationships with the Alberts and the McCabe's. Trooper Proctor said that he knew Christopher, Julie, and Colin Albert through his sister Courtney. He said Julie and Courtney were friends and that Julie used to babysit Courtney's kids. And they all grew up in Canton together as well. However, he said that they were basically just casual. And he said that this personal relationship had zero impact on this investigation. Now, whether or not you actually believe that is going to depend on your perspective and also how the rest of the evidence of the day affects you. Okay, so that was the main part of what the prosecution actually wanted to put in front of the jury. The rest of the direct examination was all about the prosecution trying to get ahead of the bad facts for the prosecution. Namely, a sea or an ocean of text messages that were sent between Trooper Proctor and his wife, his sister, his friends from high school, and his work colleagues, to include his supervisors. Now, there's no way that I can describe these text messages other than to say that they are foul, derogatory, offensive, insanely disgusting, and that they indicate, in my opinion anyway, a complete abuse of his authority and his role as a police officer. I know I'm not mincing my words, but I'm also not exaggerating. To start out, here's apparently what he sent to his high school buddies.
And there's a message there sent at 10:56 p.m., is that correct?
Yes.
And who's that from?
A friend who lives in Tennessee.
And what does he say in that text?
I'm sure the owner of the house will receive some shit.
And you respond at 10:56 as well as 10:57, is that correct?
Correct.
And what is it that you respond?
My first response was nope. Homeowner is a Boston cop too.
And what, if anything, were you saying, or what was the purpose of that text in regard to the homeowner?
I was just letting him know that essentially Mr. O'Keefe is a Boston cop and the homeowner was a Boston cop as well.
Now, this was a text exchange that was one of the promises that the defense made all the way in opening statements to the jury. David Yannetti had said in openings that they would hear a series of vile text messages that indicate not just disrespectful things about the defendant, but also that would indicate Trooper Proctor's mindset about protecting the Albert family. And this first text message that came up on Proctor's direct examination, no less, shows that the defense is keeping yet another promise that they made from the beginning. This definitely seems to suggest that Trooper Proctor is planning to prevent the homeowner, aka Brian Albert, from receiving some shit. Or, if it's not him, the system that's in place that will prevent that from happening. Then there are the offensive text messages about Karen Reed. Here's what Trooper Proctor said again to his high school buddies, this time about the defendant.
Now, do you see a response toward the bottom of the page from yourself, January 29, 2022 at 11:04 p.m.?
Yes.
And can you read that response for the jury?
Yeah, but there'll be some serious charges brought on the girl.
And what did you mean by that, sir?
That throughout the course of the day, we had compelling evidence that Miss Reed struck Mr. O'Keefe with her vehicle.
And you have two responses from friends, the same friends, at the bottom of that page, 2537, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what are those responses?
Keep your voice up loud, please, Trooper Proctor. Jurors can't hear you.
Yes, Your Honor. Number ending in 5051. Got to be, I can only imagine what internal affairs of the BPD are trying to get out there. And the second response, same number. She hot at least.
And turning your attention to the next page, 2538, at the top, if you could just read a series of responses from yourself, correct?
Yes, sir.
Read from those, sir.
Yep, so these came from me. From all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong. She's a whack job. CUNT.
Objection.
So don't spell it. You have to, so these are your words, Trooper Proctor?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead and say them.
Cunt. Yes, she's a babe. Weird Fall River accent, though. Though, no ass.
And sir, what is it that you were referring to there, or why would you text that?
These were, from all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong. Is talking about the homeowner, Mr. Albert. I had mentioned the compelling evidence against Ms. Reed at this point indicated that Mr. Albert had nothing to do with Mr. O'Keefe's death. The rest of the unprofessional and regrettable comments are something I'm not proud of, and I shouldn't have wrote in a private or any type of setting.
Then there were more that he texted with his buddies in this high school group chat.
Okay. Number ending in 4146. Question, is that chick a smoke? Again, 4146 question mark. I respond EH. I respond again, nutbag, as Chief would say. I also respond with, she's got a leaky balloon knot, leaks poo.
And what, if anything, is that in reference to, sir?
Again, to Ms. Reed's some medical conditions there. Again, unprofessional comments I should not have made, that I'm not proud of.
As far as attitudes expressed within these text messages and other text messages, what, if any, impact did that have as far as your investigation was concerned regarding this?
These juvenile, unprofessional comments have zero impact on the facts and the evidence and the integrity of this investigation.
But it wasn't just limited to what he said to his buddies in some kind of locker room talk. Here's another one that he exchanged in a group text with his colleagues at the Massachusetts State Police.
Okay.
If you could read what you wrote on June 9th, 2022, around that time, sir.
If you like women who shit themselves.
And again, sir, what is it that you're referring to there?
Again, a regrettable comment I made about Miss Reed's medical condition.
Now, if I could direct you to the following page, 2645. And again, if you could read from that page as far as who is, and indicate to the jury who is speaking and what is being said on page 2645.
I'm speaking right now. The statement she made tonight at 8/7 was mental. Thank Christ it was on BWC, which is body worn camera. Trooper Kukowski responds, that's her, smoke. Trooper Kukowski again, what'd she say? I respond, said the Alberts beat the shit out of O'Keefe, left him for dead, and that's why her taillight was cracked. She's gross. Trooper DeChico, oh, fuck her, bitch.
And it's not just his colleagues that are at his level, by the way. He also apparently spoke this way with his supervisors and group texts with them, to include Trooper Bukhenik, who we just heard from in this trial.
Trooper DeChico, August 17th, 2022 at 9:42 p.m.
Yes.
And is that an image contained on the next page, which is 2683?
Yes, it is.
And what is the image of?
That is a picture of Mr. Yannetti, appears to be from quite some time ago.
Now, turning your attention to the next page, 2684. And there's a response from you, August 17th, 2022 at 9:44 p.m. Is that correct?
Sorry, sir, go with the date and time again, please.
Sure. Page 2684, 8/17/2022, 9:44 p.m.
Yes,
You see there's like sort of three responses from you.
I have you now.
If you could just read the three responses from yourself, sir.
Okay, so these came from me. Funny, I'm going through his retarded client's phone. No nude so far. I hate that man. I truly hate him.
Now, with reference to the investigation at this point, When you're talking about his client's phone, who are you referring to?
Miss Reed.
And with regards to the phone at that point, can you describe for the jury sort of what's going on during this time period of August 17, 2022 in regard to Ms. Reed's phone?
So after obtaining a search warrant for Miss Reed's phone, we weren't able to extract any data from it until August of 2023. Troopers in my office knew I was going through the phone that evening. I was most interested in location data, text messages, Google searches. That was the update I gave the troopers in the office. It was a distasteful joke. I should have gave a proper update instead of that. I wasn't able to go through the phone as thoroughly as possible because I came across some a text between an attorney and Ms. Reed, so I had to stop going through her phone, and I made my supervisors aware of those communications.
And the thing is, these texts exchanged with his colleagues and supervisors aren't just limited to being highly offensive to the defendant in terms of objectifying her body or being completely degrading to her physical and her mental health. The prosecution also introduced text messages that showed that Trooper Proctor and the other troopers on the case also had a high interest in influencing the conclusions of the medical examiner examining John O'Keefe's body. Specifically, they talked about how they worked to influence the medical examiner as to John's manner of death so that they could get Karen Reed.
And these are text messages starting on April 28, 2022 at 10:52 in the morning. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what was the time again, sir?
April 28th, 2022, 10:52 a.m.
Yes, correct.
And again, sir, with reference to this page, if you could read the content to the jury and please indicate whom is speaking at each respective times.
Okay. I start out without a doubt. He's got diarrhea of the mouth too. Trooper DeChico, rookie move, not going into a meeting with the ME and getting that homicide determination. I respond, Yuri and I had 2 conference calls with her, sent her numerous photos, etc. We laid out the entire case for her. Trooper DeChico responds, not good enough, should have had me or Jeff do it. I respond, if you two did it, she would have made it accidental or natural causes.
And can you explain the context of those communications or what exactly is it that you and Trooper DeChico are talking about in that communication?
Okay, so the ME is the medical examiner. They conducted the autopsy of Mr. O'Keefe. Our office, it's kind of a little bit of a locker room.
Hold on, wait for the ambulance and then speak up. The jurors can't hear you way back where the court officer's standing.
So like I said, the ME stands for medical examiner. They conducted the autopsy of Mr. O'Keefe. I guess I'll address the conference calls Sergeant Bukhenik and I had with the medical examiner. The doctor had some questions as to the facts and evidence, kind of what had transpired, which is common. You know, even if it's a homicide, I've had many calls with the medical examiner's office, even if it's a suicide or overdose, always with a homicide, the doctor wants to know what transpired. Trooper DeChico and myself, we kind of like to bust each other's chops, go back and forth. So that's what he meant by saying, rookie move, not going into a meeting with the ME and getting that homicide determination. The original determination came back.
Sustained. Next question, Mr. Lally.
And of course, there's more even in this context.
If you could read the contents of those messages contained therein. Please indicate who's speaking.
So I started out, of course, it's undetermined. She was a whack job. Trooper DeChico responds, Dear God, WTF, what the hell is inconclusive about the whole thing?
And as far as your indication there, as far as she was a whack job, who are you referring to there?
Miss Reed.
Now, as far as the undetermined or what you're talking about, what is sort of the content or the context of this conversation?
That would be the manner of death was determined to be undetermined by the medical examiner's office.
And so I ask you again, as far as your reference there in the bottom of the first page, as far as she was a whack job, whom do you believe you're referring to there?
Again,
Reed or the medical examiner?
Ms. Reed.
And I already showed you the testimony of Trooper Proctor's text messages with his friends, who had absolutely no business hearing any of these details about an active investigation, of course. Trooper Proctor should not have been sharing anything related to an active investigation with anyone who is not related to the actual investigation. But speaking of relations, remember how the defense made this insinuation that Julie Albert, who is friends with Courtney Proctor, became an intermediary with Courtney between the Albert family and Trooper Proctor. Admittedly, on its face, this is a somewhat outrageous claim, but there are even texts that show that there's actually some substance behind these allegations, because Trooper Proctor was actively sharing information about this investigation with his sister Courtney as well, even though he says that he wasn't, but the texts just show otherwise.
Attention to page 2667. And these are text messages from January 29th, 2022, between yourself and your sister Courtney. Right?
Correct.
And if you could read from the top of the page through the end, and please indicate to the jury as far as who's talking and who's saying what.
So I texted my sister at work, "What's up?" She responds, "What? Why?" I respond, "Or just found it frozen to death on a front lawn in Canton this morning. Actually just interviewed Jen McCabe, said she knows you."
And the knows you, who are you referring to?
My sister.
And how did your sister respond to that?
Cut the shit. I responded, "You." There was a typo correction with my response to you. She responded, "Yeah, she knows Jack very well. She's really good friends with Julie." My sister continues on. Her sister is married to Brian Albert. My sister asks, "You still working?" ? I says, yeah, gonna be out for a while. Homicide.
And as far as your answers to those questions, or as far as your communications that you had with your sister at this time on the afternoon of January 29th, what were those in regard to, or why were you communicating that to your sister?
At that time, it was just kind of in the news. I was just kind of letting her know I was out working. She didn't share anything specific. I wouldn't share anything specific on cases with my family or anyone. It was just kind of an overall innocent conversation.
Now, turning your attention to the next page, 2669. Again, if you could read from that page as far as who was talking and what the content is.
All right. My sister starts off, "The Can't thing is a homicide." I respond, "This is at 3 in the afternoon on the 29th. Don't say a word to anyone." She said, "Of course not." I respond, "In the very least, it's suspicious." She responds, "This is your livelihood." And then I would never miss with that. 3:07, I respond, "Julie and Chris were at the bar with the victim and girlfriend. Got to interview them."
I'd like to direct your attention to page 2672. These are messages from February 1st, 2022, is that correct?
Correct.
And the one at the top starts about February 1st, 5:57 p.m., is that correct?
Yes.
And again, if you could read through as far as who's speaking and what the content of those messages are.
I texted my sister, "What's up?" She responded, nothing. I just saw Julie, and she said, when this is all over, she wants to get you a thank you gift. And I respond, get Elizabeth one. Elizabeth's my wife. And my sister responds, because I guess her and Chris were friends with John, and she's so proud of you for leading this. And then she writes, Elizabeth, question mark? I respond, she's been stuck with the kids for the last 10 nights. My sister responded, yeah, but she knew what life is like married to a cop.
And sir, as far as the gift that's mentioned, as far as Julie Albert, is that anything that you have received at any point in time?
I never received a gift. I never asked for a gift. My wife never received.
And finally, there was the exchange that Trooper Proctor also had with his wife, Elizabeth, the one who Trooper Proctor told his sister, Courtney, that should receive a gift from the Alberts and McCabe's as a result of the investigation when a gift was offered.
And, what is the date and time of that message, and what does it say, and who is speaking?
This is me speaking on June 9th, 2022 at 4:56 p.m. I text my wife, waiting to lock this whack job up.
And what are you referring to in that text, sir?
I'm referring to the arrest after Ms. Reed was indicted by the grand jury.
And again, as far as the terminology that you use in that text message to your wife, why is that?
Again, unprofessional messages I should not have sent. I don't have an explanation other than they're regrettable and it's something I'm not proud of, the language I used.
And when asked about what his justification was for speaking in this way about Karen Reed throughout all these text messages as early as January 29th, 2022, this was his response.
If I could turn your attention back to some of the comments on the language used in the January 29th and February 1st or 2nd text communications among your friend group. With reference to that particular time frame in the language that you used, what sort of information had you gathered to that point, and why would you say or use that particular language in your, particularly in your descriptions of the defendant?
So this is, 16, 18 hours later, and I conducted multiple interviews.
Speak up.
Conducted multiple interviews. We knew Mr. O'Keefe never went into Fairview Road. We knew there was one shoe at the scene, one shoe at the hospital. Mr. O'Keefe's, based off Mr. O'Keefe's injuries, Ms. Reed's statements when Sergeant Bukhenik and I interviewed her, her broken taillight, the missing taillight, some taillight pieces found at the scene, the compelling evidence pointing directly at Ms. Reed that she struck Mr. O'Keefe with her vehicle led me to make those comments.
So basically, not even 24 hours into this investigation, and he has made a very strong conclusion that Karen Reed is the culprit in this particular case. In my opinion, that is way too early to be making that kind of a conclusion, especially in a case that has as much of a gray area as this one does. But more than that, it doesn't justify the offense in the language that he used in any of these text messages to talk about the defendant. Now, the offense of the text is one thing, and Proctor says that he was being unprofessional as if that's basically the extent of the problem. But really, it's not. There are so many problems that arise out of these text messages. For one thing, of course, as I said before, he's talking about an active investigation with people who he should not be talking about an active investigation. And then there's the issue that he's supposed to be an objective investigator who is following all leads dispassionately until the evidence shows a clear culprit in the crime. And as I just mentioned, he made a determination not even 24 hours into this particular case. And after completely dehumanizing the person that he has already made that hasty conclusion about, how likely is it that someone like this is going to remain objective if, say, exculpatory evidence passes in front of him, which would require him to change his mind about the case? Do these communications suggest that he's even capable of changing his mind about Karen Reed being the culprit if he were to come across evidence that shows that she's innocent? What do we think he will do with said exculpatory evidence in that kind of a situation? Would he pass it on to his superiors? Would he hand it over to the defense? Or would he maybe set it aside or even possibly bury it? On top of that, there's the fact that these communications are also shared with Trooper Proctor's colleagues and supervisors. And as Alan Jackson pointed out on cross-examination, there is nothing in these messages indicating that the supervisors ever reprimanded Trooper Proctor for talking about the defendant in such a horrible way. In fact, Jackson pointed out on cross that Trooper Bukhenik even liked one of these horrible texts by Trooper Proctor.
You sent those text messages on that group chat. Those text messages included, as we said, or as you said, it's not one but two of your supervisors, correct?
Correct.
Were you ever reprimanded for your conduct in sending that text message?
Objection.
So that's sustained. Do we need to go to sidebar based on what you told me earlier?
We do not.
Okay, so,
I'll ask it a different way.
okay.
Did either Trooper Fanning or Trooper Bukhenik dress you down in a responsive text message in that text thread for doing something so abhorrent as looking for nudes or referring to nudes of a female suspect or subject of your investigation? Did that ever happen?
Not that I can recall.
As a matter of fact, in reference to one of the text messages in this same string, your boss, Yuri Bukhenik, actually responded to the photo of Mr. Yannetti, didn't he?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
He did, sir.
After you received the photo, that's when you said, I'm, quote, funny, I'm going through his retarded client's phone. Is that right?
Objection.
I'll allow this, but not too many more.
Sure. Is that correct? It's on the top of page
Yes, sir.
685.
That's correct.
And Yuri Bukhenik liked that comment. Funny, I'm going through his retarded client's phone. Didn't he?
I see you laughed at an image here, sir. I can't tell if he liked that comment, sir.
May I approach?
Yes.
I don't know if it's just because it's faded or... Yeah, my copy's faded.
Top 2685. You can use my copy if that helps.
All right. Thank you.
What do you see on the top of that page?
That Sergeant Bukhenik liked it.
Like what?
The going through his retarded client's phone, sir.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'll take my copy.
There you go.
So your supervisors at Massachusetts State Police not only didn't ride you for making comments like this, he encouraged it.
Objection.
Sustained.
Trooper Proctor, this is your direct chain of command. Is that right? Yuri Bukhenik?
Yes, sir.
Did you believe that your conduct was a misuse of your authority and power as you were going through her phone in August of 2022?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
No, I had a warrant signed by a district clerk, Stoughton district clerk, to go through Miss Reed's phone. I don't think it was an abuse of power. I had every right to go through that phone.
Did the warrant say anything about looking for nudes of my client?
Objection.
Did it?
Instead, this opens up the question if his supervisors are allowing and even seemingly adopting this language themselves. What does this say about the culture of the Massachusetts State Police? What does this say about how this department treats all investigations? What does this say about how they talk about these cases even outside of text messages? And on top of that, these text messages clearly indicate junior varsity conduct on behalf of the Massachusetts State Police. This is clearly not the best that they can do. Or is it? And if this is how they treat the investigation into the death of a police officer in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, what does this say about the quality of the investigation into crimes where the victim is just an average citizen? And then there is also the very apparent frustration that these troopers have with the medical examiner. Their language suggests that these troopers have been trying to do what they can do to improperly influence the medical examiner's conclusions as to the manner of death. So this means that this even casts a shadow over the medical examiner's testimony. We haven't even heard from the medical medical examiner yet, and there are already questions as to how much the jury can even trust the ME's testimony and conclusions. And let's not forget the inverted Sally Port footage, which already has cast a shadow on ADA Adam Lally himself when he failed to point out that the footage was completely inverted, and oh yeah, the jury is probably looking at the wrong taillight as a result. As I said, there are so many problems that have now become wildly apparent in this case, and this can have massive reverberations throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the perception that people have about the legitimacy of the entire judicial system there. But I'm always curious to hear what people inside the courtroom are observing of the jury and the jury's reactions to the testimony, if anything can be observed at all. And apparently, 10 of these jurors are women. I did not know this until day 22. And Sue O'Connell from NBC has been in the courtroom each day reporting on this trial. Here's what she observed of these jurors during Trooper Proctor's testimony.
One woman had her mouth open. One woman had her hand over her mouth and was watching. One woman who doesn't often look at the witnesses leaned in and looked at him like this. One woman looked back and looked at every single female juror she could look at to make eye contact with. Now, I'm leaving the men out because I wasn't necessarily paying attention to them, because suddenly the coalition of women on the jury were reacting to this language, to these words, and at one point they were just shaking their head. One woman laughed that this was just, I have to guess, an outrageous laugh reaction.
And at the end of the day, this cross-examination of Trooper Proctor isn't even over yet. I expect Alan Jackson to continue to bury Trooper Proctor on day 23. And I just don't see how the prosecution can recover this case from here on out. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Is Trooper Proctor's testimony as bad as I think, or do you disagree? Is there anything that you think that I'm overlooking or that I may have missed? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more daily coverage of the Karen Read trial, both in daily recaps and in gavel-to-gavel testimony live streamed, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is out. And if you're really enjoying this coverage, consider becoming a member of Bike Club, either as a member on YouTube or a supporter on Patreon, so we can continue putting extensive resources into projects just like this trial. Links to both are in the description below. See you on day 23.